Thank you for having me. I am a professor in the philosophy department and the chair of the department. And what I want to do today is not talk about my research, which I can assure you is deeply fascinating, but instead to talk about an idea that it came up among a bunch of us about a future direction for some of the campus. The idea came up actually as a response to when the new chancellor came in. He came in with a strategic plan encouraging a lot of interdisciplinary work. So I try to push us outside our ordinary, comfortable envelope. And so this is the sort of idea that a bunch of us thought would be a good place to go. And it's practical ethics. As you're reading the news and that, you're seeing constantly there's new scientific discoveries, new technological innovation. And as those things happen, they're leaving behind in their wake a trail of ethical challenges, one more challenging than the other. And as a society, we're reacting in a very slow and piecemeal way to these challenges, in the challenges posed in engineering, biology, medicine, environmental science, information science, all over the place. And the idea is just you're getting this kind of gap, and as the pace of innovation and discovery increases, the gap is getting bigger. And so we as a society are not knowing how to deal ethically and legally and otherwise to this kind of gap as science is racing ahead. And so this is a problem, and I think that UCSD should leverage its unique strengths to help close this gap. And so, what I want to do is, just to get something in your head, think about, UCSD will soon take over the world if it already hasn't on, big data and medicine. Precision medicine, personalized medicine. As soon as you start thinking, in communication, big data is a big thing. Offers tremendous promise. Yeah, on the other hand, as soon as you start to think about it, you start to realize there are going to be big privacy concerns. Think about genetic engineering and the possibility of designer babies. Think about the possibility of climactic geoengineering. Humans directly impacting what the climate should be and who should make those choices. Think of regenerative medicine. It immediately invites questions about how to strike the proper balance between quantity and quality of life. So there are all sorts of, I could just rattle off examples like this for hours, but what I thought I'd do is I'd give you two examples that maybe you weren't so familiar with. And these are ones that are really very recent, and they're definitely triggered by scientific innovations that have just happened in the last decade or two, and then things you couldn't really have envisioned happening before. So what I want to stress is that these are not sort of science fiction imaginings that you can put off answering the questions to the distant future. These are questions that are being asked right now and that we need answers to. The first case I want to talk about is Scott Routley. So Scott Routley, this is him in 2012. He died in 2013. Is the first person in human history where we've established communication with somebody who perfectly gives off the clinical criteria for being in a persistent vegetative state. Somebody like him shouldn't exist, but we now know that there are people like him. It's not just him, there's a bunch of others. So the story with Scott is he was a physics major, and then had a promising robotics career, and he lived in Canada, and he was at his grandfather's house with his girlfriend, driving away. They get into a car crash with a police cruiser. The policeman and the girlfriend walked away unharmed. He really just had a bump on the head, but that bump quickly proved devastating, and he fell into this persistent vegetative state. Neurologists examined him, time and time again, all the time, and there's just no hint of consciousness whatsoever for 12, 13 years. Then a group, I learned about this from a philosopher who also is an MD, Charles Weyer, who is part of this project with neuroscientists and neurologists, where what they did was they did an interesting experiment. So they took a bunch of healthy people, and they put them through fMRIs, which are fancy brain scanners, when certain bits would light up or not light up, depending on what they're thinking. And the instructions were to each of the subjects, think of that you're playing tennis for yes, and think that you're navigating through your kitchen for no. Okay? And so with healthy people, of course, they could then report what they were thinking, yes or no, and then you could then have a bunch of people who have randomized double-blind results of the brain scans, and it turns out for healthy people, it's 100% accurate, this test. So certain regions of the brain light up for yes, and certain regions for no. 100% accurate, so it's an incredibly sensitive diagnostic. Now the idea, and this was Adrian Owen, the neurologist, was let's put some people who are in vegetative states in the fMRI, and then give them the same instructions and then ask them questions. And they did so, and in the first study, 17% of the people ended up having that distinctive signature for yes or no. That shouldn't happen, right? That should not be conscious, but they are. So you could ask them questions, and you can ask, so they ask Scott questions. You can ask him, is Bob the name of your caretaker? Is Mary the name of your caretaker? Is Julian the name of your caretaker? And then, he'd answer right. You could ask him, and they did, do you like it when we put hockey on? He's Canadian. The answer is yes. And then, you could start to ask, more, deeper questions. So they asked him, are you in pain? And he said no. And now, of course, you then have a ton of ethical questions that come up, right? So should you ask him about end-of-life decisions? Is he competent? You're going to have to just, you can't just go around asking people. You need to figure out whether he's competent or not. There are questions about should you tell the families? The families, 80% of families who have people in vegetative state think that there's somebody that think that their son or daughter is conscious. Are you going to play on false hopes and that? What does it mean if they say no? It might just mean that they have some kind of linguistic inability. If it was me, I would be in there, because I don't really follow people when I'm listening to them. I'd be thinking, wait, was it yes for tennis for yes, or I wouldn't want to, So you would have to, be really sure. And then, of course, there'll be big societal questions. Neuroimaging is expensive. Does everyone imagine if your son or daughter was in a persistent vegetative state, wouldn't you want them to be neuroimaged in this way? And then, it's very expensive for society. There's a lot of different issues that are, again, you couldn't have even thought about this really before like 2006. And then now, it's a question and we have to answer it. Another one, let me just quickly go through this one. There are now 3-parent babies. So this is Ilana Saarinen. She's a teenager in the US, 13, 14 or something like that. Completely healthy and normal. But she also, like Scott, is nearly unique in world history. If you knew what to look for and probed deeply into any one of her cells, you'll find the DNA of 3 parents. 2 mothers, one father. And so she is the result of a kind of a new IVF treatment where people with mitochondrial disease, they, often they can't have children. If they do have children, the children often die, deafness, kidney failure, all sorts of different horrible problems. And so what you can do is you can take a donor egg and have that donor egg be like the surrogate. So think of like a surrogate pregnancy. But now what they're a surrogate for is not the egg, but the surrogate is the egg. But what you're doing is you're putting in the nucleus from the, you're taking the nucleus of the egg and putting it into the healthy egg sac. And so then you have healthy mitochondria. And then it's fertilized. In another procedure, the donor's egg and the intended mother's egg are both fertilized. It's interesting because then now, so they call them 3-parent babies, but they're really like 2.001 parent babies because there's about 37 genes in the mitochondria. As you may know, the mitochondria get passed on separately from in the nucleus. And then there's about 30,000 genes in the nucleus. And so really just like 37 bits out of about 30,000 are from the donor mother. But still, they're there. And if you think about the ethics and legal issues that come up, there are many. So first of all, just IVF itself is working its way through the courts in all the different states, and it's really problematic. So right now, I was very surprised when I just read this that if the donor is not a U.S. citizen, but the parents are, the child is not. And so things like that have to get worked through the courts. And so so anyway, so the first point is just that if two parents is trouble, you can imagine three. The other thing is, is there an ethical difference between the two different procedures? In one case, you're fertilizing both eggs. In the other case, you're not. Maybe if you think of like the stem cell controversy and all that, maybe there's an issue there. You get even deeper issues also that are working their way through the courts about donor rights, parent rights, and all of that. And I think in general, it really prompts a bigger, deeper question, which is that, all these different notions of a parent, which for most of world history coincided, so social parent, biological parent, legal parent, they're all being teased apart by our advances here. And so just to conclude, I think that, it would be an awesome thing if UCSD leveraged its strengths in different fields and worked on closing this science ethics gap in some way. So I think of three things to say about this. One is that I think, we're a public institution, and so I think, we have a duty to help with the societal impact of all of our discoveries. Two, I think it's a great opportunity for UCSD. So if you think, maybe you've heard of the Kennedy Institute of Ethics or the Hastings Center or something like that, but there's nothing like that on the West Coast. There's nothing like that at UC. It's a tremendous opportunity. And then three, why UCSD as opposed to some other UC? Well, I think, we are at the cutting edge on science, so regenerative medicine, big data medicine, environmental engineering, all sorts of areas. We also have a tremendously influential philosophy department stacked with top ethicists, political philosophers, and others, and then across the humanities and social sciences of many other people who are really quite distinguished. And then if you think of if you remember back to when you were there, there's the Mesa there with all of the different companies, things like the Craig Venter Institute and all these places that are also on the cutting edge, also worried about various ethical issues and how science and ethics gap will get closed. And so I think, we should leverage all these strengths together to create some kind of institute or at least some research here in this direction. Okay.